Heirs of the Omen has been out for pretty much a full week now in Shadowverse Worlds Beyond, and that means it's time to bring you my week 1 meta snapshot for the game. Now, guys, if you're interested in understanding like what the meta looks like right now, and also what specifically what good versions of those decks look like, but equally if you are, say, a free-to-play player and say you've been collecting all the set 1 and 2 cards, but you haven't yet, for example, got all the set 3 cards. I've tried to do quite a comprehensive meta snapshot here, so you're going to see how those decks fit into the current environment as well. Now, the good thing about Heirs of the Omen is there were quite a lot of new archetypes that were thrown into the mix. It wasn't just a power creep. It was really about bringing in those new archetypes, new ways to play, which I think personally has made this a more interesting set than set 2 was. But with that said, let's dive into the snapshot and take a look. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about Tier 4. So Tier 4 largely falls into the kind of meme deck category. You're not going to see a ton of these on ladder because in terms of play rate, they're not going to be particularly high. However, you will come across them because people like to have fun. People like to try like fancy, clever ways of winning. And that's pretty much summarizes what the Tier 4 decks look like. So we have got the Rose Queen combo kind of at the bottom of Tier 4. It's kind of been replaced a little bit by Izudia, which we'll come on to. There are a couple of different Jerry decks that I want to share with you. There's a Cocytus Rush, which I did a deck guide for, so definitely check that out. And then there is Stormhaven, which I think Stormhaven is potentially Tier 3. It's kind of one where I'm not entirely sure, but it is a little bit memey sometimes in that the version I'm going to show you is kind of like when it goes off big time. It's quite a combo heavy version. And then we got Fennie ramp. We're going to see quite a lot of decks in this meta snapshot with Fennie, so bear with me till you've seen all that to understand which versions we're talking about. All right, so let's take a look at some examples here. Not going to spend a ton of time, not going to go through every single deck, but this is a kind of Rose Queen combo. What you're basically doing is lining up a load of like 1-cost units, and then between turn 5 and 8, you're pretty much using your kind of higher cost cards. You're kind of clearing your hand, building up the 1-drops, and then you play the opulent Rose Queen, Super Evo to clear the board, and essentially what you're left with is a shed load of Brambles, which are 1-cost spells and do 3 damage to everyone. You know the drill. Next up, we've got Jerry Abyss. Now, this is the first of the 2 Jerry decks I wanted to share with you. I suppose you've got to ask yourself, like, which class is Jerry best in, right? And what does each class kind of add to the Jerry idea? For those of you who don't know, this is the Jerabane card. And basically, when you play it and you evolve, it replaces your entire deck with the Jerry deck, which is a 76-card deck, right? And it's basically one of every card from set 3 from the Heirs of Omen. All right. Now, what the Abyss version is best at doing is always getting Jerry in the first 5 turns. So we've got lots of cards that kind of like draw. And so what we're trying to do is just find Jerry and play him as soon as we can Evo. But then beyond that, there's kind of like not a win con. The win con is to actually win with the Jerry deck. So you can... As in, like, your win con is to run out of the deck. So once you've played all 76 cards, you instead of dying when you run out of the deck, you basically get the victory card and you win, right? But the thing is, that Jerry at the end of every turn, you probably know this, but basically it discards your hand and then draws 6 cards. So you get through those cards quickly. Now, when you just use the Jerry deck, you've actually got access to really good cards, and you're pretty much playing the archetypes. You can play Crest Haven almost through it, or you can kind of play the different archetypes if you pick the right cards to play. You're not necessarily going to win and close the game out with that, but they are good enough for you to kind of control the board and stay in the game. And so it's kind of quite skillful in a sense, because you've got to make the right selection every single time. And there's no one deck guide that's going to teach you because every game's going to be unique. But your win con is still to draw the victory card. All right, so that's the Abyss version. Next up, and you can see here, I've put the QR code. So if you want the deck, you can just copy the QR there and load it straight into your game. Next up, we got Miracle Dragon. Now, this is the idea here is anyone who played Hearthstone and you liked Miracle Rogue, this is kind of like going all in. Look how much card draw we've got here, guys. We've got the Seraphic Tidings, we've got the Adventurers Guild, we've got the Greatness Ascended, right? We've got the Golden Note Melody. So this, and of course the tablets. So basically, what we're doing here is we are ramping up. We are playing our Fennies. We are getting to our Jerry really quickly, and we play Jerry, and then we play Ruler of Cocytus. And because we've discounted them either through Fennie or through the Draconic Strike, which can kind of make Cocytus only cost 8 or Jerry cost 2, for example, we're able to play Jerry, and then we're able to play Cocytus pretty much in the same turn. So Cocytus replaces Jerry's 76-card deck, right? And then obviously with Jerry discarding cards and then drawing 6, and with all the draw cards that we've got, we pretty much win the game instantly. It's really, really cool, and I think it is deserving of the Miracle title, because when it goes off, it's just, there's not really another version that can do this. It just kind of like instant wins. And there's different alternative win cons too. You can obviously just play the Cocytus win con, and you can kind of like Fennie for discount. So there's a few different ways. We've even got the fan in there as well to kind of like create wards or storm down the board. So yeah, this is kind of like a really fun deck. It's one of the more fun versions that I played this season so far. Okay, next up we got Cocytus Rush. Now, hopefully, if I remember, I'll put a link at the top here. I did do a Cocytus deck guide on this, and this is really, really fun, guys. I won't go into it because the guide talks about it a lot, but the basic idea is that this deck can get Cocytus down on the board quicker than any deck in the game. Okay, and it does that because we're pretty much hard mulliganing for ramp, and we are going to look to play Cocytus when our opponent's pretty much on turn 7 or 8, right? And so the idea is that even against something like Rune, we can basically get Cocytus down 2 turns earlier and try to kind of out Cocytus them. It's a really fun deck, and it's pretty good. And it's kind of got a chance against Rune as well, right? So that's kind of like in this meta, that's kind of like the cool thing. But again, these are tier 4 decks, right? They're not going to be super consistent, so bit memey, take it for a pinch of salt. Okay, next up we got Stormhaven. So this is a Stormhaven deck with using some of the new cards. We have got the Winged Lion statue, which is pretty good. We've got the Shining Disenchantment, which actually works quite well with the Skullfane, right? Because Skullfane can destroy this and do 4 damage instantly and heal. And also, of course, with Skullfane here, we've got quite a lot of statues and quite a lot of amulets that this guy is going to come down and destroy for a big combo. Rodeo to obviously pull them. Yeah, if you like the idea of a kind of traditional amulet deck, this deck is really, really great. We've now got the Blinding Faith, which gives you cheap AoE. And obviously Colette as well is really, really good in this deck because she does 2 damage to 2 different units pretty consistently with the amount of amulets. This might be slightly better than tier 4. I'm not entirely sure, but I did play it a little bit, and I just found that when it went off, it was amazing, but a little bit inconsistent. And things like the other aggro decks like Sword can basically sort of outrace you, basically. Okay, next up we got Fennie Ramp. Now, this Fennie Ramp is a somewhat sort of traditional type of Fennie, right? It's like you've got so you're ramping up, and then you're playing Fennie, and then you've got things like Olivia, which obviously draw cards, but the cards are now discounted, and you've got the big Genesis Dragon to finish. We have got a couple of Galmeirs in there, and we've got the new 9-drop, and of course we've got Forte because, you know, why would you not? So you can kind of like have quite a bit of range between Forte and Genesis Dragon, but you know, it's a little bit it's a similar thing with the old Forte decks, that is still a little bit inconsistent. We have got things like Ocean Rider to help shore up the early game, and this obviously Seasoned Merman can pretty much clear anything on 5, which is pretty cool. But I do think that this deck will, you know, it still suffers a little bit from the inconsistency, right, of drawing the cards in the wrong order, etc. So that's why I've put it in tier 4. Okay, next up, we've got, as I said, we've got quite a lot of decks, guys. So I'm actually trying to make this quite comprehensive, include them. We have got Slate Rune. Now, this is like the Spellboost Rune deck, but it makes use of the new tablet to try and essentially thin your deck to find the cards that you want. Earth Rune is still a thing. It's not played as often, but I would say it's probably in the tier 3 in terms of power range. Now, we have got the brand new Forest Craft Control, which is the Izudia Control deck, which I'll show you in a minute. I think Wardhaven has probably, to be honest, it did get a ton of new tools, but it has got a couple, and I actually think Wardhaven's pretty good. The main problem is it just doesn't do very well into Spellboost, but it does have a slightly does it have a slightly better match against Sword? I'm not actually sure, because it struggled against Midrange Sword because Midrange could outgrind it. But I need to play that matchup more against the new Loot Sword, because the Loot Sword deck's not quite as grindy. But obviously Cincero can just melt like Aether boards and stuff like that, so I'm not really sure. Storm Dragon's still a thing, guys. You can still cheese wins with Storm Dragon, and even against really good decks, so I feel like it's tier 3. It's not consistent enough, though. Puppet Portal is being kind of replaced by other things, but it's still a deck. If you were somebody who built that deck in set 1 or set 2, then it could be a really good deck actually to bring to this format, because Puppet Portal it's always one of those decks where it's always kind of got a 50-50 chance, it feels like. So if you're not spending money on the new set, I think Puppet Portal's not a bad option. And then we got the Tempo Fairy version, which received just a couple of new things, but not too much. So another one that's probably quite a good carryover deck from the last meta. And then we've got the Artifact Hybrid, which has dropped down. Remember in set 1, this was tier 1, but I think now that decks have got the ability to heal out of range, the Masterwork's not as big a threat as it once was, and it's just kind of been power crept a little bit. So let's take a look at some of these decks. So this is the Slate Rune deck. So as I say, I've not played this a ton, but it's very similar to a traditional spell boost deck, but you actually play the slates to try and thin the deck. Obviously, thick cards like Cocytus we only run one of anyway, right? And you can see that we're deliberately running a few more one-offs because we're expecting to discard the deck. And that's just going to get you pretty. I think the difference here is that Cocytus is more consistent in this version than the other version. Next up, we've got the Izudia Control. Now, Izudia Control is a really cool new archetype. It allows you to play some of the Control Forest cards. So in the early game, Bestial Swipe's a new card, which is great. It does 4 damage on a choice target. We've got things like the Guardian Allure to help control the hand, because one of the problems with this deck is actually managing your hand size. You can end up with quite a full hand. You're not very proactive on board, so your opponent can just be quite passive if they've got good late game. And then it's almost like a who can get the late game finish off first. But what's cool with this deck, guys, is kind of 2 win cons, right? So the first win con is we play Izudia down, we Evo, and then basically it gives us a spell that says does 20 damage to our opponent, which would obviously kill a full health opponent. It costs 5, and every turn it gets 1 turn cheaper. So technically, by say like turn 12, what you then do is you could play a second Izudia and play that card and win. Now you can bounce your initial Izudia with Bug Alert to do that. Or you can obviously just draw into your second Izudia. So that is our sort of main win con in the deck. However, there is a second win con, and I think this is understanding which win con to play is what then makes this deck pretty viable. It's what makes it a tier 3 deck and not a tier 4 deck. And the alternative win con is actually just to kind of outgrind your opponent. So for example, against Loot Sword, which is a very good deck, a very top meta deck right now, this deck actually does very well into that, but you have to play the alternative win con, which is to just outgrind it. And so what you're doing is you're using things like your Deepwood Fairy Beast and you're bouncing it with Bug Alert to just keep healing. When in response to like the Cincero, for example, you use your Super Evos on Gilnalise for the heal, and also you can use Congruent of Unkilling, Bug Alert, to just keep recycling a wave of warded units with Rush. So that alternative win con of just controlling the board through things like Cruel and all your kind of control tools, and then just repeat healing and spamming the board. Basically, decks like Loot Sword and Aggro Abyss, they'll just run out of resources and cards, and then you'll just beat them down basically with your board. Yeah, really, really cool deck, really fun. The main problem with this deck is it loses out to sometimes to things like Rune, which can kind of Rune can just kind of like get there first, if you like, with the end game at times. And also things like Haven, it's an interesting matchup, but it can kind of like beat your board down. It's a bit of a race for the end win con. Now this is Wardhaven. I do think Wardhaven is still a really good deck. It is potentially it's tier 2. Obviously, it is great against Roach. This is like the ultimate anti-Roach deck. It got some good things as well. The Knight of the Holy Orders. This card is a 2-drop ward, so it fits nicely into Wardhaven. But every time that it receives a buff to its attack or defense, which you can do through Darkhaven Grace, which you can obviously do through even like when Wilbert, because it's not a fanfare ability, it's pretty cool. So when Wilbert puts the crest down, then you Aether and pull this thing, it will still trigger its ability. So it actually just grows. So that's pretty cool. In addition, it doesn't grow. What happens is it gives you +1 heal. The other thing is we've replaced the old 3-drop with the Supplicant of Repose as a 3-drop ward. It's a 1/4. It's going to be pretty big with the buffs from Wilbert and Aether. And in addition to that, this is going to give us some little bit of chip heal, which was kind of like something that I think was a slight weakness with Wardhaven. It didn't have like that slow heal, but with the addition of Supplicant, we now can do that, especially with Darkhaven Grace as well, and the Knight of the Holy Order. So we've got quite a little bit of heal in this deck. Dose of Holiness has a bit of heal. Salefa obviously has a bit of heal. So yeah, this is actually pretty good. I definitely recommend giving Wardhaven a shot. It's just not very good against Rune. That's the big weakness. Next up, we have got the this is the old faithful, the puppet. And if you want to play just kind of on your old cards from set 1 and 2, this is probably the deck to do. Nothing too exciting to say here. Just a really decent like value deck that can kind of like have a nice mixture of control, and obviously relies heavily on things like Odin and Orcus to close the game out. Then we got Tempo Fairy. Main addition here was the bearer of the fairy tale. This is really about getting on board early, buffing your actual fairies with things like Fey Twinkletoe, so you can actually put quite a bit of chip damage on your opponent. Aria obviously means your fairies can then start going to face every turn, and Tatiana gives you a free fairy every turn. And so what we're then looking for is an Odin or a smaller Roach combo, you know, maybe sort of 9 or 10, for example, to kind of close out the game. Okay, so let's take a look at Tier 2. Now, I do feel like Aggro Abyss has suffered a little bit, and I wasn't sure with Aggro Abyss, to be honest, whether to put it towards the top of Tier 3. It's one that I'm really on the fence about. I've put it in Tier 2 because it's still one of the most powerful aggro decks in the game. Like, when it goes off and you get the right match, you will absolutely just close games out by turn 6. Like, there's no doubt about that. However, there are quite a lot of new archetypes in this set that have basically led to a lot more heal being introduced into the game, and I think that's really hurt a deck like Aggro Abyss, which is obviously wanting to close the game out quickly. Heal is kind of counterproductive to that. So I think this deck is really in that kind of 2.5 tier. It's really in between decks tier 2 and 3. Let me know in the comments what you think, especially anyone who's played quite a lot of Aggro Abyss this season. Love to hear your thoughts. Next up, we've got Mid Abyss. Now, this is actually quite a new deck. It's just something that has started to form in the last few days, where you know, it's an old idea, Mid Abyss, but making use of some of the new cards. We'll take a look at that. Lyshenna Egg Portal. This is a new archetype, guys. Playing down a load of eggs, which slowly grind our opponent down, dealing damage to them and healing us. Mode Abyss is the brand new archetype for Abysscraft, which we're going to get into. And Disdain Ramp is also a a dragon build which brings in multiple cards that have this Disdain ability, so we'll take a look at that. And the old faithful mid-range sword, which was tier 1 so much last season, I do feel has dropped down to tier 2. It doesn't quite have the reach and the aggro of the newer sword decks, but we'll take a look at these decks now. All right, so this is the aggro abyss. Nothing much to report here, guys. The biggest difference is we are playing a couple of the devotee. This card's quite flexible in an aggro deck because it can give you, for example, in a sword match, it can give you the AoE, right? A bit like Apollo, we can kind of evo it and clear out a 2 health board, wide board. But the flexibility of this, being able to just play it as a 3/3 on 3 is great, right? When we're trying to kind of keep that pressure up on the board. So this is a really nice replacement for Apollo. Other than that, everything is pretty much the same. We are trying to go face. We're trying to build a combo with things like Exceller, a wide board, so Exceller can storm and hit face, and Baltro's Crest obviously is doing damage every single turn. It's all about the beatdown. Next up, we got Mid Abyss. Now, this is something that is a really confusing deck for your opponent, right? So when they queue up against you on ladder, they're not going to know what it is you're playing. Like, if you play, for example, Beryl straight out, they're going to be like, oh, it must be Aggro Abyss. But it's actually not. And what this deck does, it feels a bit messy. It doesn't feel like a very elegant deck, but when you analyze the cards here, right, what it does is it gives you as the player flexibility. I think this deck is going to really reward skillful players, right? And it might even be a dark horse in the tournaments this weekend, the lobby tournaments and the SVO qualifiers this weekend and next weekend. I could imagine something like this being a pretty good pick for high skilled players. And the reason why is it's got flexibility. If you understand the card combinations here, you can play it slightly more control, right? With the Ghastly Soiree into Vuela, with things like Gravy and the Undead Soldier, you can play it in that kind of traditional control route, but it's also got the ability to shift gears and just kind of like burn your opponent down. So I really think this is a good deck, and I think in the hands of a skilled player, this is a solid tier 2 pick. Okay, Egg Portal. Now, I have to say, I do try to get my collection quite quick. I do spend a bit of money on the game, and I've got most of the cards. The one deck or archetype I'm actually currently not able to put together at the minute is this. I'm actually missing the Lashenas. I think it's one of 2 cards that I'm missing. And yeah, so I've not actually personally not played with this deck much this season, but I have played against it. This deck is actually the deck that the #1 Portalcraft player on ladder is using. So for any big Portal fans, like, this is the deck to play right now. Definitely go and give this one a run. Kind of like the dogged ones in there, right? I actually lost a game where this caught me out and got me with giving you that kind of cheeky bit of reach at the end. And the eggs just kind of like chip away at the board. You've got good control tools. And then once it's down to like 10 or whatever, you've got things like Odin and dogged ones where you can just like start to get some surprise finishers on the board. Really nice new archetype. I hope it gets a little bit more support in future sets. Mode Abyss. This is a favorite of many players. I do think it's cool that Abyss have got a new way to play. What is mode? Mode is simply, which mode would you like to select? So it reminds me of the old druid from Hearthstone. You play a card, it gives you 2 options. Which one do you want to pick? Sometimes it actually gives you 3 or 4 options, depending on that. And obviously, what the legendary card, the 2-drop here, what the legendary card is allowing us to do is to essentially get the benefit of playing both modes in the late game, right? So what it means is that, again, it's quite fun because it gives you flexibility. It's like, do I want to do option A or do I want to do option B? On top of that, the power level of the options is pretty good, and we've got quite a nice curve, and we've got some the ability to kind of close out the game pretty well as well into the late game. There's even an OTK combo that you can pull off, but it's quite rare that happens. Basically, R and V, what you do is you save the 0-cost spells that this generates, and then you play them all together, and you can just suddenly flood the board with like 5/5s with Storm. Essentially, that's what you do. Yeah, really cool deck and pretty powerful right now. I do expect this deck to evolve. We're only in week 1 of the meta, so I do expect it to change as we see the tournaments unfold this weekend. It'll be interesting to see how Mode Abyss evolves to the meta. Next up, we got Disdain Dragon. Now, I do think that this is probably the most powerful version of Dragon right now. And when I say most powerful, I don't necessarily mean like as a one-off power ceiling. I just mean like consistency as well. I do think that Gaia is quite difficult to deal with for a lot of decks, and is a quite nice option for that kind of like super evo target. But you've still got, you've still got your Fortes in there. I'm actually quite a fan of the Supplicant of Disdain. There's only 1 copy of it in here, but, you evo that out, putting it up to 7 health, and then if you trade into something that does, like, say, 5 damage, that's suddenly 5 heal that you get, not just to itself, but to your face as well. But we've got several Disdain cards. We've got the Devotee, combines really well with the new Ferocious Flame, which deals damage. So it's all about when you deal damage to yourself, you do additional damage to them. That's what Galame's kind of theme is here. And so it's just kind of, it just gives you kind of solid value throughout the curve. The Devotee giving you a much needed early drop along with the Ocean Rider. You're not kind of like reliant on the ramp. That's what I think makes this deck really good, because a lot of Dragon decks, they can be really good, but they just overly reliant on the ramp, and then when you don't get the ramp, obviously it's not fun. So I do think that this version is kind of less reliant on the ramp, which I think is really cool. Like, I think that's actually really important. It's got a nice curve, it's got good power at every level. Neptune gives you obviously the heal, whereas Forte and Genesis give you the kind of beat down. So again, quite flexible in, do you want to kind of play a bit more mid-range, a bit more grindy, or do you want to kind of try and close the game out? You kind of got some options there. So definitely one to go and check out. There's the QR code. Give it a shot. And next up, we got Midsword. This is the old school Midsword, guys. If you built and invested in this deck, I know a lot of players, like from set 2, will be like, well, what about the cards that I've just been using? I haven't got loads of money to buy the new set immediately. This would be a really solid deck to play. I do like, right now, things like the Coachwoman in there to help you compete in the early game with the other aggro decks. And this deck can just control the board. Guldaria is still a beast at controlling the board, so if you've got her and you haven't got the Cicera, then absolutely fine. And of course, cards like Amelia. Now, I do add 2 copies of the Congruent because I do think this card actually can work quite well on its own, to be honest. You can play it. It gives you a copy of the Boots, so you could put Boots on itself to give it essentially like the ability to rush straight away, which is quite nice. You've also got a little cheeky heal in there for heal 2. And of course, if you can play them at the same time as Congruent, then you're dealing 3 damage to your opponent. So I think the value package in that is good enough to play on its own. And the 4-drop slot was always a bit of a weakness of Midrange Sword as well. So it gives you an alternative, particularly like, for example, if you're going first and you can't like Zirconia Evo on turn 4, you can just play this down if you like instead. Yeah, overall, I think this is still a really solid deck, guys. It's still very powerful. You won't see it play quite as much at the minute because everyone's on the loot sword stuff, but trust me, this is still supremely powerful. So I think the biggest weakness here is it doesn't have the heal that other cards do have, other decks do have, but it's great at kind of grinding your opponent out. All right, so that brings us on to tier 1, and yet again, guys, I am putting Combo Roach in tier 1. Now, I know it's always a slightly controversial one. Some people think it's the most powerful deck in the game. Other people think it's absolutely terrible and they can't get 2 wins, string 2 wins together with it. We've said it time and time again. It's one of the most high IQ decks, maybe in any card game I've ever played. Like, it's such a big brain deck. I've been watching Rika, and I've got his deck to show you in a minute. I've been watching Rika's VODs and watching him play this deck. And I swear to God, the guy he's just a genius. I just love to get inside his head and watch his thought process for one game. When you see this deck piloted by a highly skilled player, it's amazing. It's very good against Spellboost, and it's pretty good against anything that wants to just kind of sit around all day. It can deal with. It does struggle a little bit with Loot Sword, but I think it's still a very top tier deck. I'm putting it at the bottom of tier 1 because I think it's maybe less consistent on ladder. Might be the best tournament deck, but it's slightly less consistent on ladder than the other three. But I still think power-wise, it's probably tier 1. Now we've got the brand new archetype and my favorite deck in Shadowverse Worlds Beyond so far, and that is Crest Haven. So a Havencraft new archetype, and it has burst onto the scenes and it is doing very well. Many players have got to Grandmaster with it. Similar to be said for Loot Sword. Just when you thought Sword couldn't get any more powerful, Loot Sword comes along and knocks Midrange Sword off the mantle as the best sword deck, and that's largely driven by the power of the treasure or loot and the combination with the new legendary card Sincero, who is just absolutely bonkers. And then we've got good old Spellboost. I'm a little bit sad that Spellboost is still top of the meta, but unfortunately, I think it still is. So let's jump into the tier 1 decks. Don't forget, guys, I appreciate all the support, and if you want to hit that thumbs up for me or subscribe to the channel, it'd be much appreciated. This is the combo Roach deck from Rika. As I said, I think he is probably the best forest player. He's on the pro circuit, so if you go and watch the pro league, for example, you'll see he's one of the team members there. I actually think that he is the best forest player I've seen. I think Chappie's very close as well. Chappie's a great, shout out to Chappie, great Twitch streamer. I think he's been pretty consistently in the top 10 for Combo Roach. He's a great Combo Roach player too, but I think Rika just, it's like he's cheating. You think he's just manipulating the cards. Like he plays this deck so beautifully and perfectly, and it's so hard to replicate. But yeah, this is his deck, and I think that therefore should be the one we share. There are several versions. You'll notice that he has opted for things like Eradicating Arrow over the other one. It's slightly more attuned for a slightly slower meta, I think, not running like the 1-drop proactive cards. But yeah, and he also runs Olivia. One of the things that's interesting with this is, do they run anything that costs more than 5? And sometimes they don't, sometimes they run La Maga, but Rika actually runs a single copy of Olivia. So there you go. The big addition really is adding Gilnelise in there as well. So Gilnelise, I mean, so she's basically giving the deck a little bit of heal, which is pretty cool, and also gives it quite a good option, for example, around turn 5 against Loot Sword to clear out the board. And potentially an alternative win con if the game does grind out and go pretty late. Although this deck really should be closing the game out by turn 9 or 10. Next up, we got Crest Haven. As I said to you earlier, this is a brand new archetype and one of my favorites since the game came out, to be honest. What we're looking to do is play out our permanent crests in Wilbert, or Grimnir, and Marwyn, and then we top that up with the countdown crests. And that means that we're dealing 5 damage per turn just from not attacking. We're often healing from the Supplicant of Repose. And then we can play Madison Benison and basically cheat it out, where we get 10 heal, but we don't suffer the 10 damage in 2 turns because our crest spots were full, and therefore the Benison couldn't actually, the crest that does 10 damage couldn't actually be placed. So it's a completely like OP busted way of healing. It's fantastic. It's got nice removal. It's got good AoE in Selefa and the Blinding Fae for those kind of go wide boards. It's got good hard removal in Unholy Vessel and the Congruent of Repose. It's got good draw from the Sanctuary, from the Congruent of Repose's crest. And then obviously it's got the alternative win con as well of Cocytus, but often we don't even need to do that because the crest just does all the damage. We can play Gilnelise on turn 10, and then we can basically get the spell that does 5 damage to face. And you can think about playing Gilnelise and playing the Shining Disenchantment, for example, with Gilnelise's spell. The Shining Disenchantment you can trigger immediately because you've got enough crests to do so. And that basically means you do 4 damage from this, 5 damage from Gilnelise's spell, and another 5 from the crest. That's 14 damage from hand. So yeah, it's a fantastic deck. There's quite a few different ways of navigating to the win con, and I'm really enjoying playing this deck this season. And next up, we've got Loot Sword, brand new archetype. What this has introduced is the idea of these little cheap one-costed treasures that cards get from Fanfare and from Last Words. And then what you're basically doing is you're using those treasures to either boost your board. They're not great value, but you know, some of them are pretty good. Like they can give rush to a unit, for example, or give ward to a unit. But the main way you really want to use your loots is you want to fuse them into Sincero. And once you fuse Sincero, let's say for example you put all 4 treasures into Sincero, it'll basically do 4 damage to the board when you play Sincero, and then you use Super Evo him, and he does another 4 damage to the board and enemy face. So you're doing 8 damage to the board and 8 damage to face. It's like Gildaria on steroids. At least Gildaria only cleared the board. It didn't really do damage to face, but Sincero does. It's such a broken card. It's absolutely bonkers. We've also got things like the Congruent as well as a really nice way of using the loot cards to deal damage to clear the board. And also the returning stash as well. Some people run 2 or 3 copies, but I prefer just a single copy, just using it as another alternative fuse option. And then Octree, the new 3-drop, which is pretty cool because she puts a crest down, and when that countdown runs down from the crest, it gives us a 1-costed spell that does 4 damage, so it gives us even more reach. Really powerful, guys, combining with the things that we already had, like the Alberts for reach and a single copy of Tentacles. This deck just kind of has it all. The main way it loses is where people can heal. The Izudia Control, for example, is great because it can control this board, and then it can heal every time this thing does burn damage, and it can then run out of resources, but it's not easy for most decks to do that. I've also put a single copy of Lucrative Deal in here because this actually can run out of resources, and you know, I think it's the kind of deck where you're not too worried about giving your opponent 1 card. Actually, in this meta as well, sometimes there's some cheeky things that can do, like against Crest Haven and against even sometimes against Loot Sword, against Combo Roach, against Runecraft. These are all decks where they often are managing their hand size to max capacity, and so the Lucrative Deal often leads to them overdrawing, and maybe they lose a really important card, and that I would call a very lucrative deal, right? But the fact is, it gives you 2 cards for only 2. Usually that costs 3 for that ability. So it's a cheeky little tech card in there. It's one I've been testing out quite a bit, and I'm relatively happy with it so far. Okay, so there is the QR code if you want to do Loot Sword. And last but not least, we have got the Spellboost Rune. And as you can see, guys, if you had this deck from set 2, then you do not need to worry about collecting the new cards, because quite frankly, the only new card you really want is Gilnelis. Everything else is a card that existed prior to set 3, and it just shows how powerful this deck is. Now, I want to be clear, guys, when we're talking about the Meta Snapshot, I actually think Shadowverse Worlds Beyond overall does quite a good job in terms of balance. I've played many CCGs, and trust me, like even though there are more powerful decks, the balance and the gap between decks is actually nowhere near as insane as like broken metas that I've played in other CCGs. Not even close. So like, I want to be clear about that. I think that's a real plus, and the developers deserve a bit of credit for the design space and how they've managed to create so many archetypes and there not be a ginormous gap. But the thing about Spellboost Rune is it still has the #1 way of just cheating the mana system, and I think that's what Declimb does. I think Declimb is probably a card that is going to be nerfed in the upcoming balance patch in the next 3 to 4 weeks. We're going to get a first balance patch. I know they were going to focus mainly on buffs, but I would think if they were going to do any sort of nerfs, that cards like Norman and cards like Declimb might well be you know, top of the list, if you like, for a nerf. Declimb is just so broken, and it just allows you to do things that even the new cards can't overcome. So there we go. That's the Spellboost Rune. Again, I've got plenty of deck guides on my channel, guys, if you want to go and see more fuller explanations for each of these decks. I had a lot to get through today, so thanks for bearing with me. And I do expect in the next few weeks we are going to see a few tournaments. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the meta shakes out. I do expect things to change in this report. So bear in mind, this is only week 1, guys. So, you know, it's my opinion. It's week 1. Take it with a pinch of salt. This is not like the gospel. It's just my take on the meta. What I might do in future weeks is start to condense the amount of decks down to really focus in a bit more on kind of like what we're seeing the highest play rate on. At the minute, people have been quite experimental. There's the old decks, there's the new decks. I do expect a slightly smaller snapshot in future weeks. But I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, leave a thumbs up. And that is the complete meta snapshot for week 1 of the Heirs of Omen. I'm BJ the Brave. Appreciate all your support. If you enjoyed this one, check out this video next.